"Nick," I said, my voice sharp, "listen carefully. Don't ever mention last night or Carol again. If you do, you'll never see me again. Now please just drive me home. No more talking." Time has a way of slipping by unnoticed, its passage marked only by fleeting moments. I remember relocating to the city during a particularly challenging period in my life. The unfamiliar streets and the skyline, filled with both hope and uncertainty, felt overwhelming. I made the decision to sell my car and embrace a simpler way of life, one where everything I needed was within walking distance. In place of the car, I indulged in buying a Harley, a dream bike that quickly became my refuge whenever I needed to clear my mind. My daily routine was simple: walking to work in the mornings and spending quiet evenings alone in my apartment. After the turbulence of my previous relationship, I found the solitude to be a welcome change. Mornings felt particularly refreshing, almost like a new beginning. I would leave early while the city was still stirring, savoring the calm before the demands of my job began to take over. My position at a manufacturing firm soon became the most stable part of my life. Yet, even within the comfort of stability, small moments often reminded me of how swiftly time passed. As I was sending out a letter one day, it hit me an entire year had gone by. Time flies, I thought, feeling strangely detached. It had become a mantra I had grown accustomed to, as if the years were slipping through my fingers. As I continued my walk to work, I took solace in the fact that I had chosen to live close to the office. The condo I'd found was perfect for convenience, with shops and restaurants just a short walk away. My motorcycle was always ready for a weekend escape, offering the promise of freedom whenever I needed it. The streets were serene at 6 a.m., and I would reach the office in less than 15 minutes. After brewing my coffee, I would sift through my emails, most of which were spam, but a few contained important updates. By 7:10 a.m., I had reviewed the previous night's sales. The office slowly filled up as the day progressed, and I carried on with my work. As purchasing manager, I oversaw a third of our 175 employees. I'd been with the company for 6 years, and lately I was being recognized as a rising star. My workdays were long, typically starting around 6 a.m. and stretching well past 7:30 p.m. My job had, over time, become the focal point of my life. Today, being the last day of the month, I made sure to meticulously check the inventory, delay 2 deliveries, and finalize all shop orders. My boss, Ken, stopped by on his way out. "What are you still doing here?" he asked, eyeing the empty office around me. "You've done an excellent job. Go home." "I'm just finishing up," I replied. "Seriously, take a break. The office is closed tomorrow for fumigation. Enjoy your weekend," Ken said as he left. I stayed until after 8 o'clock. As I walked home, I noticed couples enjoying drinks and dinner, while I headed back to my condo alone. It was a renovated 2-bedroom unit with a large balcony that overlooked a park and a lake. I had taken to walking around the lake on weekends, finding solace in its quiet beauty. When I got home, I noticed the blinking light on my answering machine. I didn't bother checking the messages, simply deleting them as I had done countless times before. I grabbed an open bottle of my favorite wine from the fridge, uncorked it, and poured myself a glass from the crystal cabinet I had recently started using. There seemed little point in saving the good glasses for some distant occasion. Life felt too short for that. With wine in hand, I turned on the TV and opened my laptop. AOL had notified me of 6 new emails. 2 from eBay, 1 from my parents, 2 from my friend Nick, and 1 from a spammer promising to teach me how to make money from home. "I'll check them tomorrow," I thought, heading to the kitchen. I had renovated the kitchen shortly after moving in, making it resemble something out of a gourmet magazine. It featured a 6-burner stove, a double oven, a stainless steel fridge, granite countertops, and a wine cooler. After struggling to sleep for a while, I realized I needed to exhaust myself physically to get some rest. So I converted the 2nd bedroom into a home gym. Each night, I worked out intensely from 9 to 10 p.m., followed by a cold shower, a final glass of wine, and then bed. Over the past year, I had slimmed down from 195 to 175 pounds, becoming leaner and fitter. Dinner was always simple, since I often arrived home late. I had local meals prepped and frozen for convenience. Tonight, it was steak, peppers, and rice ready in minutes. With another glass of wine, I watched the news, but it was the same depressing cycle of violence, scandals, and reality shows that seemed to insult my intelligence. I turned off the TV and headed to my workout room. After 20 minutes on the treadmill, I stretched for 15 minutes before starting my real workout, 30 to 45 minutes of punches and kicks on a heavy bag. Each punch felt like I was releasing a piece of myself. As a child, I had trained in Kung Fu at a strict dojo near my home. After months of pleading, my dad finally enrolled me, but it was much harder than I had anticipated. The sensei tolerated no slack and pushed us relentlessly. After 2 months, I was ready to quit, but my dad wouldn't let me. "You paid for the year, and you're finishing it," he insisted, pushing me to toughen up. Reluctantly, I stayed, and after that I gave it my all. That's when I met Nick. Nick was a year older and much bigger than I was, but we quickly became best friends. We trained together, holding pads for each other, though Nick often complained that my kicks were too strong. "Ease up, you don't have to kick me through the wall," he'd joke, but I was determined. In 2 months, we'd be allowed to spar in class, and I couldn't wait. When my first sparring session finally came, it was a disaster. I got knocked out by 3 other students, but after 3 months of hard work, I finally won a match, and from that point on, I never looked back. I kept training for another 4 years before eventually quitting. Nick, on the other hand, only stuck with it for 2 years. By the time I earned my second-degree black belt, I found myself more interested in girls than in training. My sensei begged me to stay, but I was done. We parted ways as friends, and I visited the dojo occasionally, though eventually I stopped. That was until a couple of months ago. It was almost 11 o'clock, and I was drenched in sweat after my workout. I peeled off my clothes, threw them in the hamper, and stepped into the shower. The cold water revived me as I looked at my red, swollen hands, washing away the grime of the day. My hair was cut short, and I was sporting a 10-day-old beard. After shampooing and brushing my teeth, I dried off and wiped the mirror clean. Staring at my reflection, I wondered if I was truly alive. On Saturday morning, I sent Nick an email. "If Lisa hasn't made you sell your bike, meet me for breakfast at 8 o'clock Sunday at the mom and pop place on 321. I love my Harley. I'd driven sports cars in the past, but nothing compared to the freedom of being on my bike. The rumble of the engine, the wind in my face, and the feeling of vulnerability were exactly what I needed. I had ditched my helmet months ago, wearing only shades and sometimes a cap. By 9:30 on Saturday, I hit the road. Only one other biker passed me, giving me a peace sign. Most casual riders had already stored their bikes for the winter, but those of us who were hardcore bikers waited for the first snowfall. Needing an oil change, I headed to the dealer. "Just an oil change," I told the technician. He said it would take about an hour, so I wandered around the showroom. A lime green custom chopper caught my eye. I swung my leg over it and admired the craftsmanship. The salesman approached and said, "Sweet ride." I nodded and agreed. He told me the bike had a 2008 engine with only 2,200 miles on it and mostly custom Harley parts. He even offered me a test ride. "I probably can't afford it," I said, but he mentioned that the owner was open to trades, so I told him about my 2008 Ultra. The next thing I knew, I was cruising down the road on the chopper. It handled like a dream, though the added vibration was noticeable. I called the salesman after my ride and gave him my feedback. "A little more vibration than I'd like, but it rides well," I said. He offered to get the owner on the phone, and when I asked why the bike was for sale, the owner explained that his wife hated the rear fender pad, so they were getting something more comfortable. "I made that mistake once, never again," I replied. "Do you have any saddlebags for it?" I asked. "Yeah, and a small bolt-on windshield if you're interested," he responded. About 30 minutes later, the couple arrived at the dealership with the bike's accessories. After some negotiation, we struck a deal. 45 minutes and $8,000 later, I drove off with their bike, and they left with mine. It was definitely a win-win. I scheduled an appointment for the following week to swap out the seat and add a rear shock, as my back was already starting to feel the strain of the hardtail ride after just 100 miles. When I pulled into the diner the next morning, Nick was already waiting with a coffee. "When did you get this beauty?" he asked, checking out my new ride. "Yesterday. Traded my Ultra for it. What do you think?" "Damn, it's awesome. Nick replied, spending the next 20 minutes admiring it and wishing he had the nerve to make a similar trade. Lisa would eliminate me if I brought this home, he said, laughing. After we ordered breakfast, I filled Nick in on the trade, and we spent the rest of the meal catching up. Business had slowed down for me due to the state of the economy, but I reassured Nick that we'd still have a strong fourth quarter, thanks to securing some new distributors. Nick, however, shared that his company had laid off nearly 10% of its workers and was now struggling just to avoid bankruptcy. I never thought I'd be happy just to have a job, he said with a heavy sigh. I keep telling the guys to be thankful they're still working, Nick added, his voice tinged with frustration. We also discussed Lisa's job at the hospital. While her position was secure, it was exhausting. Sometimes she's so tired I have to pick her up at 3 a.m. because she can't even drive herself home, Nick said. There was a moment of hesitation before Nick casually mentioned that Lisa and Carol still kept in touch, and that Carol occasionally asked about me. I quickly cut him off. Don't, I said sharply. I don't want to hear it. Nick quickly changed the subject, then brought up a rumor he'd heard about me getting into trouble at the dojo. I heard you cleaned house with Sensei's new fighter, he said, laughing. I shrugged it off. It wasn't a big deal, I replied. He was cocky after knocking someone out in the ring, so I gave him a couple of sidekicks. Maybe I was a bit too forceful, but he wasn't guarding himself well. Nick laughed at that. You never do anything halfway, he remarked with a grin. We chatted for another hour before Nick had to leave. He invited me to dinner with Lisa's family, but I declined, citing work. You can't hide forever, he teased before taking my bike for a test ride. When he returned, wide-eyed, he exclaimed, I need one of these. It's way faster than my wide glide, though I wouldn't want to take a sharp corner on it, he added, and I chuckled, warning him to stay calm and not follow my crazy lead. He headed home, and I set off for a long afternoon ride on my new green bike. Around 6:30, I stopped at a diner for a quick meal, just a burger, onion rings, and a Dr. Pepper, while keeping a watchful eye on my bike through the window. A group of girls parked next to it, and one of them climbed on. That didn't sit well with me. How do you like it if I sat in your car with my feet on the dash? I asked, surprising them. Two of the girls quickly jumped off, but the one still on the bike asked if it was mine. Yes. And didn't anyone teach you not to touch other people's stuff? I responded, more annoyed than I'd intended. The girl shrugged. I didn't know. My mom and my dad would have hotwired it, she said nonchalantly. Then, looking at the bike, she asked, how's it ride? And how does anyone sit on that tiny back seat? It rides fine, and I don't care about the back seat since no one rides there anyway. I snapped, growing more irritated. Now get off my bike. Like I'd ruin it with my 105 pounds. She shot back, clearly unfazed. And I wouldn't ride with you even if you begged. With that, she walked into the diner, and I shook my head, returning to my table. The girl sat at the counter, occasionally glancing my way. When I was paying the bill, the skinny brunette approached me. I'm giving you another chance, she said with a playful smile. You look like a lost puppy, and I love puppies. You can give me a ride home as an apology for being rude, she added. Surprised, I didn't object. 5 minutes later, we were riding back into town. The faster I went, the tighter she held on. When we reached her place, she complained about the seat, but handed me her number. Call me when you fix the seat, she said as she walked up to her apartment. By the way, I'm Pam. Good looking but pushy, she added with a wink. I slipped her number into my pocket, deciding to revisit it later. As the month went on, I secured a 5% price cut from 2 vendors, which earned me some praise at work. Can't even mention that you might get a company car, keep it up, and there might be a bonus this year, my boss said, clearly pleased with my performance. In the meantime, I also got a new gel-filled seat and rear shock for my bike, making it far more comfortable for long rides. I even asked the dealer about a better passenger seat, and after some deliberation, I bought a quick-release one for occasional use, even though it cost a small fortune. Harley parts always do. I toyed with Pam's number for a week, not sure whether I wanted to follow through. I hadn't dated much over the past year, just 3 dates, and one had been with a female customer for business. The other 2 didn't go anywhere. I hated blind dates. Finally, I decided to call her. Hello, Pam, it's Steve, I said, wondering if she'd remember me. Steve who? She asked. Green Chopper, I replied. I thought you were a lost cause, she said with a hint of amusement. What took you so long to call? She added. Work's been busy, and I had to get a few things done to the bike, I explained. There's a ride this Saturday. Want to join? Did you fix the seat? She asked. Let's just say it's big enough now, I joked. All right, I'm in. What time? 9:30. Dress warm. It'll be cold. The high's in the 50s. Got a leather jacket and boots. I'm good. Just don't be late. I'll meet you out front, she said, ending the call before I could fumble through any more small talk. I felt like a teenager asking someone out for the first time. Saturday came, and I bundled up in heavy leathers and gloves. It was freezing, so I had to stop and put on a stocking cap. By the time I picked up Pam, I was 5 minutes late. You're late, she said immediately. Only by 5 minutes, I replied. Late is late. Now let me see this new seat, she said, inspecting the bike. After bolting on the seat, we headed out. Pam held on tightly, her face pressed against my back as we rode. When we arrived at the dealership, Pam rubbed her numb, cold face and shivered. I handed her a neoprene mask. This will help. It has a skull on it. She complained, it's for warmth, not fashion. Let's just say it's big enough now, I said, slightly amused. The ride began at 10 o'clock, lasting 2 hours with about 30 bikes, mostly single riders. We returned to the dealership by noon, and after declining the cold food they offered, I asked Pam, want to grab lunch? Yes, but somewhere warm, she replied. We went to Denny's, where Pam warmed her hands on the coffee mug. That was fun, though cold, she said. Do you do this often? Not as much as I used to. I used to ride to Sturgis every year, but it's been a while. I've seen pictures. Is it really that big? Bikes everywhere, and it's a nonstop party for 2 weeks. My buddy Nick and I camped out once, but now I prefer more comfort. What do you do for work? She asked. I'm a purchasing manager. How about you? I teach art and do freelance work. It doesn't pay much, but I enjoy it. Are you seeing anyone right now? She asked. Why? Are you applying? I teased, noticing her noticing me squirm. Relax. I had someone, but it didn't work out. Now I'm just dating here and there. What about you? Same. Had someone special, but it ended badly. Haven't dated much in the past year. So you're basically a born-again maid, she joked. That's good. Less risk of catching anything. Unlike the players who sleep with anyone, what makes you think I want to take you to bed? I asked, amused. With a body like mine? Why wouldn't you? She laughed. Now that the personal stuff's out of the way, let's see what else we have in common, she added with a smirk. For 2 days, Pam and I talked about our likes, dislikes, and shared what we were comfortable with. She wasn't thrilled that I only mentioned having one bad marriage, but we got along well. Over the next 3 weekends, I got to know her better. We liked the same foods, I ran while she rollerbladed, and we agreed to disagree on my workout room and her favorite band. Want to go to a club Saturday? She asked one evening. Some friends of mine are going, and I want you to meet them. I'm not much of a dancer, I replied. Most guys can't dance, just fake it, she smiled. We hadn't gone beyond kissing, and when she invited me to stay over, I politely declined, saying I wasn't ready yet. Don't worry, I'll be gentle, she teased. On Saturday, Pam drove, saying, I'm not freezing on your bike tonight. The club was crowded, but we found a decent table. Pam's friends were nice, and we were having fun until I ran into my worst nightmare. Hi, Chicken Dan. Snare Dan. Got a new girl? Did the last one dump you? He taunted, moving closer. Pam, clearly confused, asked, Who is this? This, I replied, is Craphead Dan. He's a bodybuilder whose brains were fried by steroids, I said, as his friends pulled him away. I couldn't resist adding. I hear after the gym closes, the bodybuilders blow each other. Dan snapped, flipping our table and causing chaos. The bouncers quickly intervened and kicked everyone out. Stay inside, Pam, I told her. You don't want to be part of this. I'll call you later, I added before stepping outside. Dan and his buddy began pushing me, obviously afraid. Dan needs backup, I taunted. Dan swung wildly, missing every punch as I dodged effortlessly, slapping him in mockery. When he charged at me, I sidestepped and kicked his knee with a loud crack. I followed up with a spinning kick to his chest. As he struggled to get up, I delivered a crushing blow to his jaw, shattering it along with his nose. One of his buddies grabbed me from behind, but I stomped on his foot and slammed my head into his face, breaking his nose. He dropped to the ground, and I quickly scanned for the other guy, but he had disappeared. I walked over to Dan, still groaning on the pavement. I grabbed his hair, pulled his head up, and whispered, "Tell Tom, if I find him, it'll be worse." I let his head fall back to the ground and kicked him in the groin before walking away. That's when I saw Pam, standing there with her mouth hanging open. "I told you not to come out here," I said, grabbing her arm. "We need to go before the police show up," I urged her. I led her quickly away from the scene, hurrying toward the parking garage where Pam's car was. I opened her door, pushed her into the passenger seat, and sped off toward my condo. The ride was quiet. Pam sat there, staring at me, clearly unsure of what to say. "Steve, what was that all about?" she began, but I cut her off. "Parking the car. Not tonight. We'll talk later, but not now," I said, holding up my hand to stop any further questions. "Are you okay to drive?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "I'm fine, but not tonight," I interrupted, surprising her. "I'll call you." I glanced back to make sure she was okay, then headed inside my building. As soon as I got inside, I slammed the door and threw my keys against the wall. "God damn it, Carol. I hate you," I screamed, ripping off my jacket and punching the wall over and over, letting my frustration spill out. The next morning, I woke up around 6 a.m., sitting on the floor of my workout room, still dressed in the clothes from the night before, drenched in sweat. My mind was numb, but my hands were throbbing, cut, swollen, and red. The ice water stung as I soaked them, alternating between heat and cold to reduce the swelling for hours. Thankfully, nothing seemed broken, but I knew I wouldn't be hitting the heavy bag anytime soon. Later, I found some old ointment for my wrists, though there wasn't much left. At least it was Sunday, I thought. A day to rest, unless someone comes knocking. 2 weeks later, the police found me. "Steve Moore," one of the officers said at my door. "Yes," I replied. "There's been a formal complaint. We need you to come down to the station and give a statement," the second officer added. I agreed and grabbed my jacket. The next 2 hours were spent explaining everything. Yes, I knew Dan. No, I didn't know the other two. Dan had started the fight in the club, and they attacked me outside. I was just defending myself. There were witnesses. Asked the people at our table and the bouncers. The officers confirmed my story, but one of them was still angry. "You nearly eliminated one guy, and the other will be on crutches for months. You didn't need to knock them out like that." I was afraid for my life. "How did I know they didn't have a weapon?" "I just wanted to end it quickly," I replied. "You taunted Dan into throwing the first punch, then knocked him senseless," the officer remarked. "What did he do to deserve that?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "You wouldn't understand unless you were there," I said, tired of the conversation. "Now, if I'm not being charged, I'd like to go home. Nick picked me up later. They say you nearly knocked 2 guys out," he said as we left the station. "Not both, just one," I replied. "I don't want to talk about it," I added, clearly not in the mood. "Maybe you should talk to someone about your anger," Nick suggested. "I don't have anger issues," I responded, brushing off his concern. "Let it drop," I snapped. "Okay. I'm just worried about you," Nick said. "I know. It's been a long night. Just don't bring it up again." There were 3 new messages from Pam on my machine, just like before. I deleted them without listening, but she didn't give up. For the first 3 weeks, she called 5 times a week, then it dropped to 3, 2, and eventually once a week, always on Fridays. Each message started the same. "It's me, Pam, again. Just checking if you're free for dinner or a chat tomorrow. Oh, and starting next month, I'll be waiting on your doorstep instead of calling. Just a heads up. Good night." "This girl is persistent," I muttered, deleting the message. She can't be serious, I thought. Or could she? I fell back into my usual routine. Work, home, eat, work out. Nick called a few times, inviting me to dinner or to catch a game, but I usually declined. I spent Thanksgiving with Nick and Lisa, sending them a list of topics we wouldn't discuss. Dinner was tense, as always, with the unspoken elephant in the room. Afterward, I thanked them and took a cab home. The next day, Pam left a short message. "Since I haven't heard from you, I guess I'll be camping out on your doorstep next week. Hey, don't worry. I'm bringing a pillow. See you Friday." She wouldn't actually do that, would she? I thought. But as the week dragged on, I found myself looking forward to seeing her again. Pam was amazing, And despite my reluctance to revisit the past, she wasn't taking no for an answer. By Thursday, I was anxious, and by Friday, I was completely useless at work. I kept staring at the clock. "Big day tonight?" Ken asked, walking by my office. "What?" I snapped out of my daze. "Must be some girl to throw you off your game." He laughed. "Get out of here. You're no good today. Have a great night, and I'll see you Monday." I left the office, grabbed my company car, and found myself speeding home, heart racing. "Calm down. She might not even show," I told myself, easing off the gas. I parked near my building and waited in the car for over an hour, watching the entrance. I made some calls, reviewed some proposals, and froze in the cold. Still no sign of her. Frustrated, I decided she was just messing with me. As I headed back to my condo, I saw Pam sitting on a pillow by my door. "Are you always this late?" "No wonder you have no life," she said, standing up. "If it weren't for a kind old lady, I'd still be waiting outside." "Aren't you going to invite me in?" she asked, holding a sofa pillow. I smiled and opened the door. We stepped inside. "I nearly froze waiting for you." "I don't think I could have lasted much longer," Pam said, tossing her jacket and pillow onto a chair before heading toward the kitchen. "Give me a second," I replied, hanging up my coat and loosening my tie. "Well, I'm waiting," she said, hands on her hips. "For what?" I asked, starting the coffee. "For an apology for ignoring my calls and leaving me with a million questions. My friends were asking about the psycho I was dating who put 2 guys in the hospital. It didn't happen quite like that," I said. "They got off easy." "Easy?" she shot back. "They were taken away on stretchers. Could have been body bags." I replied calmly, "You've got serious issues. Let's talk about it over dinner." "Fine. What's on the menu?" she asked. "Anything but chicken," I said. "I can't eat it after seeing how it's processed. How about beef stir-fry, seafood Alfredo, or steak and peppers?" I asked, scanning the freezer. "You cook these?" she asked. "No, I buy them frozen from Tony's. I pick up 6 meals every Monday and heat them up when I'm too busy to cook." "But with a kitchen like yours, you don't cook?" she asked. "Only when I have the time or guess," I said. "Let's go with frozen meals tonight and discuss breakfast later." She finished her coffee and said, "I'll go with stir-fry. You do the Alfredo." She was impressed with my wine cooler, though it only held a few bottles. "I just buy what I like," I explained. During dinner, Pam finally asked, "What's your story?" "It's simple," I said. "I met Carolyn in college. We got married, had a few good years, and then it fell apart. That's it. I've read more details in Cliff Notes," Pam said, then proceeded to share her own story. "It began when her mother left her as a baby. She was raised by her grandparents until they passed away, after which she lived with her father and his girlfriend until she turned 18. Pam got a scholarship to art school, but her dad ended up in prison for dealing pills to make ends meet. She worked as a waitress, did portraits, and even modeled for art classes. Some of it was art, not a strip club," she quickly added, a small laugh escaping her lips. She then spoke of her short-lived marriage to Rob, who had become controlling. "I got pregnant, hoping it would bring us closer, but it only made things worse. One night, he accused me of cheating and pushed me down the stairs. I had a miscarriage, and he was arrested for trying to eliminate the baby. Why didn't you just leave him?" I interrupted. I was still trying to make it work. "You don't walk away when things get tough," she said, her voice quiet but steady. Rob was convicted of attempted homicide, and Pam got a quick divorce. "So, Steve, you're not the only one with a messy past," she finished, her eyes red. We sat in silence for a couple of minutes, finishing our wine, each of us lost in thought, wondering what was next. "I need a shower before bed," Pam said, standing up. "Since I didn't bring any clothes, I'll have to borrow something of yours. So get moving if you want me in bed tonight," she added with a teasing smile. "You can bare your soul tomorrow," she continued, heading toward the kitchen with our glasses. I showed her to the bathroom. "I'll grab you a toothbrush," I offered. "Need anything else?" I asked. "You're so prepared," she replied. "This will do for tonight. I'll bring my own stuff next time." "If there's a next time," she said, stepping into the shower. While she showered, I laid out everything she might need. I joined her shortly after, and we spent a long, steamy time in the shower before drying off and rushing to bed. It had been over a year since I'd been with someone, and the closeness of the moment hit me harder than I expected. We made love and then lay silently in each other's arms for a while. "One more brownie, then let's call it a night," Pam said softly. We fell asleep together, though she drifted off first. I knew tomorrow would be tough. She'd want answers, especially after opening up to me like she did. I wasn't sure I was ready, but I didn't want her to leave. "God damn it, Carol," I thought bitterly to myself. Pam woke up to sunlight and found me gone. She spotted a note on my pillow, went for a run around the lake. "If I'm not back when you wake up, look for me out on the balcony," and yell, "What is he, crazy?" Pam muttered, wrapping herself in a blanket. She checked outside and saw I was freezing, shaking her head at the idea of running in that weather. She sat by the balcony doors and waited. About 15 minutes later, she spotted me running. "Hey, sailor, you want to get laid?" she yelled, waving. I waved back and headed inside. "How long have you been up?" I asked. "About 20 minutes," she replied. "Isn't it cold out?" I asked. "Not if you keep moving," she said with a smile. "Running gives me a morning high," I replied, heading toward the bathroom. "Give me a minute to shower, then I'll make you breakfast." As I stepped into the shower, Pam followed. "You wash my back, so I'll return the favor," she said with a grin. Between the shower and other activities, breakfast was delayed by over an hour. After 2 showers and plenty of fun, we finally got dressed. "Coffee, tea, or hot chocolate?" I asked. "Coffee sounds perfect," Pam replied. "You've got your choice. Pancakes, waffles, omelet, or fruit-filled crepes. But we only have sausage links," I said. "Sausage links only?" Off with his head, Pam laughed. "Let's have crepes today and waffles tomorrow," I suggested. "Confident, aren't you?" I teased. "Of myself, yes," she replied playfully. "Of you, not so sure," I said with a smile. "How about breakfast first, then questions, or we could just stay in bed all day?" I suggested. "Let's do both," she smiled. As we ate, I found myself wondering how to share my story without sounding like an idiot. That was delicious. "I didn't realize I was so hungry," Pam said, rubbing her belly. "Any coffee left?" she asked. "Just enough for you," I replied, clearing the dishes. "So, do we start here or in bed?" Pam asked, grinning. "I'd prefer unclothed in bed, but you'll probably distract me," I answered. "Let's start here, then move to the bedroom. I want the full story. We've got the whole weekend, so don't leave anything out." Pam smiled and said, "All right, what do you want to know?" I hesitated for a moment. "How long have you had such a hot temper?" I asked. "I don't have one," I responded defensively. Pam pressed on. "But what about that night at the club?" I sighed. "That was a long time coming. Dan had it coming for what he did, and I'm just glad I stopped when I did." Pam still seemed confused. "Just tell me what I need to know." She curled up on the couch, and I took a seat across from her. "All right," I began. "Carol and I met at a party Nick and Lisa threw. Neither of us was looking for anything serious. Since Nick and Lisa were getting married, Carol and I kept crossing paths, and eventually, we started dating. She was a party girl, and I often had to pull her out of trouble. She flirted with the wrong guys, which caused problems. So after 2 weeks, I stopped calling her. Carol confronted me. "You don't like me anymore?" she asked. I replied, "Carol, if you're with me, you're with me only. I'm tired of you flirting with everyone." She asked, "So, are we exclusive now?" I said, "Yeah, I guess so." From then on, we were a couple. At Nick and Lisa's wedding, Carol said ours would be more casual. 2 years later, we got married, set up a home, and life was good. We both had decent jobs and had fun. But in our 3rd year, things changed. One night, Carol asked if I had any fantasies I wanted to act on. For her birthday, she wanted a fantasy night where she'd be tied to the bed and pleased until she cried enough. I got into it and prepared everything: silk ties, chocolate, whipped cream. On her birthday, I set up the room with candles and told her the safe word was pepper. For hours, I pleased her until she finally yelled pepper. It was a fun, passionate night. Pam raised an eyebrow. "What did you get for your birthday?" For her birthday, I bought her a ZXI outfit, and we played a role-play game, I replied. I sent her to a bar, watched guys try to pick her up, and then walked in pretending to be her pimp. Afterward, we had dinner at a nice restaurant and then went home for a night of great ZX. Pam chuckled. The following year, for her birthday, I was supposed to be her slave for the night. It didn't go well. We went to a dance club, and I spent the evening fetching drinks while guys hit on her. That's when I met Dan and his buddy Tim. They danced with Carol and flirted with her all night. Dan even handed me $20 and said, "Get us another round, boy." Carol backed him up, saying, "You promised, just go get the drink." When I returned, Dan and Carol were grinding on the dance floor. Furious, I told her it was time to leave, but Dan shouted, "Why don't you wait in the car, boy?" I grabbed Carol and said, "Pepper," the safe word. She finally agreed to leave but kissed both guys on the cheek before we went. The ride home was silent. When we got back, Carol said, "That was fun." Fun? I was humiliated. I muttered, "You danced like a cheap hooker letting those guys paw at you," I said angrily. "What if I had done the same thing with some girl while you sat there waiting for your turn?" "It was just a joke, a fantasy," Carol insisted. But I was too upset to listen. "You went too far," I told her, pouring drink after drink. I almost punched that guy when he tried to touch me. "Don't touch me until you get the stink of those guys off you." Carol went to bed, and I passed out on the couch. The next morning, I woke up hungover with an empty bottle of Jack Daniels. For the next 2 days, we barely spoke until she finally blew up at dinner. "Get over it, Steve. I pushed it too far, but no one got hurt, and we're still married." "What's the big deal?" she shouted. "Fine," I said. "For my birthday, I want a Mina AITA with 2 other women." Carol looked at me, confused. "You mean me and another woman?" "No," I replied. "Me and 2 other women, and you just get to watch." "Okay, if that's what you want," she said, but there was no enthusiasm in her voice. I packed my bags and told her, "I'll call and tell you where to send the rest of my stuff. I'm not into sharing or swinging, Carol." I left, hearing her scream something as I walked out the door. I ended up at a Holiday Inn bar, where Nick found me. "Want me to tell her I found you?" he asked, walking over. "Not yet. We have different ideas about what being unfaithful means, and I'm doubting my marriage," I said, downing another beer. Nick, trying to lighten the mood, said, "She's only upset because you won't go along with her. She was dry-humping those guys while they called me boy, and she doesn't think she did anything wrong," I replied. Nick laughed awkwardly. "Well, I guess you won't be trying that fantasy again," he said, realizing too late that it wasn't funny. "Sorry, bad joke. But you're not really leaving her, are you?" he asked after a pause. "Not this time, but if it happens again, I'm done," I said firmly. After a couple of days, I went home, and the makeup sex was incredible. Things were fine until my next birthday. "Ready for that menage a trois?" Carol teased, as if nothing had happened. "I found 2 hot babes," I said, frustrated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. It was a joke. Instead, Carol suggested a couple's massage by another couple. The massage began with both of us lying side by side on the bed, close enough to touch, but not kiss. The woman giving me the massage was stunning, and the guy working on Carol looked like a Greek god. Both were barely dressed and oiled, and we weren't allowed to touch them. As I felt the woman's hands working on my back, I suddenly realized the guy was massaging Carol. That was when I decided to end the session. Carol looked disappointed, clearly enjoying herself. I paid the couple and sent them on their way. When I got back, Carol smiled. "That was interesting," she said. "Didn't like your massage?" I didn't speak to her for the rest of the day. The next morning at breakfast, I asked, "Was getting massaged by a guy one of your fantasies?" "I thought it was my birthday gift," she replied, matter-of-factly. "We both had our fun, and no damage was done." Looking back, I regretted not speaking up then. My silence made her think I was okay with it. I told her we should stop with the fantasies, but by then, the damage had been done. She believed she could do whatever she wanted without consequences. After 2 hours of talking, I felt thirsty, so I grabbed a glass of juice and sat next to Pam. Things got out of hand. I admitted it, and Pam shrugged. We've all done things in the heat of the moment. It's human nature. We debated dinner options and ended up at an Italian restaurant. Over wine, Pam said, "It doesn't sound like the worst marriage ever." What she did later was much worse. "I'll tell you after dinner," I replied as our food arrived. On the cold walk home, I continued. Carol wouldn't tell me her plans for her next birthday. She just said it would be a night to remember. By Friday, I still didn't know what she had in mind. After dinner, she led me to the bedroom, undressed me, and tied me up with handcuffs and leather straps. It was supposed to be fun, but then I heard the doorbell ring. My heart raced, terrified it might be Nick and Lisa. It wasn't them. Pam and I reached my condo, and she protested when I stopped. "Finish the story," she said, settling on the couch. "I need a drink first," I replied, grabbing 2 Coronas. "I've never told anyone about that night, and it's going to put me in a bad mood." "You don't have to if you don't want to," Pam reassured me. "No, it's time I unload this," I said, my voice firm. "I just don't want to drive you away again." "I'm not going anywhere," Pam said softly, reassuring me. "All right, just be warned," I replied. There I was, lying on the bed when I started to hear voices in the distance. I should have called out the safe word, Pepper, but curiosity overwhelmed me. I heard footsteps heading toward the spare bedroom. After waiting for what felt like 10 or 15 minutes, I started calling Carol's name, getting louder each time. Eventually, I screamed her name with all the force I could muster. 15 seconds later, my world came crashing down. Dan, completely unclothed, walked in and immediately taped my mouth shut. "That'll keep you quiet while Tim and I have our fun," he sneered. "You really are a cock," he mocked. "This is too much for you. But don't worry, we'll take good care of her." He tossed the handcuff keys onto the dresser, taunting me before leaving. I screamed into the tape and fought against the restraints, hearing Carol scream faintly in the distance. I struggled for what seemed like hours, until I physically couldn't move anymore. Dan finally returned, slapping my face. "I just had wild sex with your wife, and she loved every minute of it," he mocked, clearly enjoying himself. "We should do this again." After he left, I thrashed helplessly, my struggles causing the bed to collapse beneath me. I lay there, drained and unable to move, feeling as if my very soul had been torn apart. I could hear the front door slam shut, followed by the sound of a shower running. I felt like I was dead inside. At some point, Carol entered, screaming when she saw me. She quickly freed me, apologizing profusely and explaining that Dan was supposed to release me. My hands and feet were covered in blood, but all I could see were the hickeys scattered across her body. In a blind rage, I lost control, raising my voice and throwing things around the room. I stormed into the guest room, saw the ruined bed, and began destroying their room as well. That's when I felt an electric shock. After the third jolt, everything went black. I woke up in a hospital room, restrained to the bed. A nurse sat nearby, explaining that I was in Memorial Hospital, brought in the night before. "How are you feeling?" she asked gently. "Tired, and my hands hurt," I muttered. "You lost a lot of skin, but you'll live," she said before leaving. The doctor came in next. "You look better today," he remarked. "I'll remove the restraints. You have scars, but they'll fade over time. You're free to go now, but you'll need pain medication and ointment for your hands. The police say no charges were filed." "Oh, and you don't have any clothes?" the doctor added. "That's fine. I'll call a friend," I reassured him. Nick arrived with clothes and asked, "What happened last night?" "Carol came to our place crying, saying it all went wrong," he added. "Nick," I said, my voice sharp, "listen carefully. Don't ever mention last night or Carol again. If you do, you'll never see me again. Now please just drive me home. No more talking." The rest of the ride was silent. I knew Nick had a million questions, but I wasn't in the mood to answer. I thanked him as I got out of the car and headed to my building. Without a key, I went to the manager's apartment and asked him to let me in. Mr. Kelly opened the door, and we stepped inside to see the mess. Furniture and clothes strewn everywhere. "Steve, I'm not throwing you out, but you need to find a new place within 90 days, Mr. Kelly said. "I'm sorry," he added before leaving. That night, I crashed on the couch, still in my clothes. The next morning, I surveyed the damage. The bedroom furniture was destroyed, and Carol's clothes were scattered everywhere. I made coffee, then found my phone buried under a pile of things. I had 3 missed calls from Carol. I turned off the phone and unplugged all the others, except for the kitchen phone, which had an answering machine. As I finished my second cup of coffee, the phone rang. The answering machine picked up. "Steve, I know you're there. Please call me. What happened wasn't supposed to happen like that. I'm scared to come home. I love you." Carol's voice pleaded through the machine. Ignoring the message, I decided to take a shower, wrapping my wrists to protect the wounds. Afterwards, I made a shopping list and headed out. My first stop was to pick up my prescriptions, followed by some medical supplies for my wrists and ankles. I grabbed a few lawn bags, then hit the ATM to withdraw the maximum allowed from both of our accounts. I also canceled my Sprint account and set up a new one with a lock number. The last stop was the liquor store, where I picked up a case of Coronas. Back at home, I found more messages, 2 from Carol and 1 from Lisa. I deleted Carol's and listened to Lisa's. She said she would be by at 7 o'clock to pick up a few things for Carol. Looking at the time, I realized I had only 2 hours to get everything ready. I spent the next while filling 12 bags with Carol's clothes, shoes, and other belongings. After a short break and a couple of beers, I finished by peeing in each bag, a small but fitting act of revenge. When Lisa and Nick arrived, Lisa asked, "What's all this?" "This is all of Carol's stuff," I replied. "I just came for a few outfits," Lisa said. I told her, "I'm being asked to move out, and I'm not taking Carol with me. She can come for the rest of her things later. Shouldn't you two talk it over?" Lisa suggested. "Not a chance," I responded. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got beers to finish and plan to get some sleep unless Carol tries to get me arrested again." They left with what they could carry, and I flipped the blood-stained mattress before crashing for the night. The next morning, I woke up at 9 o'clock in pain. I took some painkillers with the last of my beer and went back to sleep. That's how I spent most of the weekend, drifting in and out of sleep. I called my boss to request the week off, explaining that I'd been in an accident. He was understanding and gave me the time I needed. It seemed like the wreckage of my marriage was reason enough. By Monday, I finished what I started. I withdrew half the money from our joint savings and checking accounts, opened a new account in my name, and signed the paperwork to remove myself from our shared accounts. Although it would take 7 days to process, I canceled our joint credit cards, paid off half of the balances, and updated my HR records to remove Carol as the beneficiary of my 401k and life insurance. It was a productive day. The rest of the week, I searched for a new place to live. Since my time was limited, Carol, after weeks of me ignoring her calls, began emailing me constantly. I didn't know why she didn't just stop by, but maybe she remembered the last confrontation. Finally, I replied to one of her emails. "Our marriage is over, Carol. Please leave me alone. I hope your night with Dan and Tim was worth it." To my surprise, she replied almost immediately, "I'm so sorry. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Dan told me he let you go and that you left. I wasn't thinking clearly. We smoked a few joints. I'll give you some space. I really love and miss you." I finished my beer and turned to Pam. "Now you know my night from hell. I still hate her more than you can imagine." Pam asked, "So that's why you went after Dan? What happened to Tim?" "I hired a private detective a month ago. I know where he works, lives, and his gym schedule. After dealing with Dan, I'm not sure where Tim is now." I replied, still trying to calm myself down. "Steve, why bother with Tim? Dan was the main problem, and he's out of the picture. I need to close this chapter, starting with Tim and ending with Carol," I said, my voice growing steadier. Pam looked at me, her face tense. "You're scaring me. You're not thinking about hurting Carol, are you? After what you did to Dan, you'll end up in jail." "I won't hurt her physically," I said quietly. "Physical pain fades. She deserves much more. She will pay," I said, my voice trembling with rage as I paced back and forth. "Steve, let it go," Pam pleaded, her tone filled with concern. "You're not divorced yet, but you're practically free. Just sign the papers and move on." I can't let her off that easily, I snapped, frustration bubbling over. "She has to pay for what she did." My eyes were wild, and I could feel the fury consuming me. "Steve, I don't like this side of you," Pam said, her voice trembling slightly. "You don't forgive, you just want revenge. If you go through with this, we're done." Her words stung, but they didn't stop me. She grabbed her coat and made for the door. "Don't call me after this is over," Pam said, her voice tinged with finality. "Goodbye, Pam," I muttered under my breath as she left, the door slamming behind her. 2 weeks later, I confronted Tim. When he opened his apartment door, I didn't wait for an invitation. "We need to talk," I said, pushing past him into the apartment. "Look, it was all Dan," Tim babbled nervously, backing away. "Carol set everything up. We were supposed to let you join in. I didn't know you were still tied up when we left. I'm sorry, man. Please, just leave me alone." I didn't have time for apologies. "My birthday is in 2 weeks," I said coldly. "I want you gone by then. If you're still here, I'll make sure you never have sex again. Got it?" Tim nodded, terror etched in his face. 2 weeks, I repeated, then turned and left. One down, one to go. For $8,000, I got my birthday present. The day before my birthday, I received an email. It's all set for 9:30 a.m. I went to work the next day in a mood I hadn't felt in ages, a strange sense of exhilaration and anticipation. My coworkers wished me a happy birthday, and there was even a cake in the break room. Later, my boss took me out for dinner, and by the time I got home, it was nearly 8 p.m. My answering machine was blinking with 25 messages, but I deleted them all without listening. I grabbed a Corona, sat back, and waited for what I knew was coming. Just before 9 o'clock, there was loud pounding on my door. I sat there for a moment, steadying myself, then took a deep breath before answering it. "Asshole," Carol screamed as Nick held her back. "Good evening, street hooker," I responded, my voice calm and measured. "How have you been?" Her face was red with fury and distress. "How could you send that video to my parents and friends?" she cried, sobbing uncontrollably. I smirked. "What video?" "Maybe if you describe it, I'll know which one you mean." "Goddamn you, Steve," she said through her tears. "Do you hate me that much that you'd ruin my life like this?" I mocked her, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, you mean the sex tape? The one labeled Carol Moore is a street hooker and cheats on her husband?" I rolled up my sleeves, showing her the scars. "I not only saw it, I lived it. CDs? They're a daily reminder of what you did. Should I hate you? Absolutely. You destroyed our marriage." She fell to her knees, sobbing harder as I continued. "Did you know Carol? At first, I thought Dan and Tim were hurting you. I would have cut off my hands to save you. That's how much I loved you. But you set it all up with them and even let them tape it." She sobbed uncontrollably now, her entire body shaking. "Your parents, our friends, they all blamed me for the breakup. Maybe now, after watching the tape, they'll understand. Or maybe they won't. I don't care anymore. I was sorry," she whimpered, her words muffled by her tears. "I tried to talk to you, but you wouldn't listen." I sneered. "You mean sorry you planned your fantasy of getting screwed by other men while tying up your husband? I should have left you that night." Nick, who had been silently watching, suddenly intervened. "Steve, you've gone too far." I turned my glare to him. "Have you watched the tape?" I asked, my voice cold and sharp. "No, I haven't," he replied, sounding uncomfortable. "That's because I didn't send it to you and Lisa," I said bitterly. "I didn't want to drag you into it. But if you think I'm wrong, watch the tape. Then imagine it was Lisa, and I spent over 3 hours trying to save her, thinking she was in danger. Then tell me what you do." I paused, making sure he understood the weight of what I was saying. Carol continued to cry, but I ignored her, turning back to Nick. "If anything on that tape isn't true, I'll send it to her too. If not, it is what it is," I said, my voice calm as I handed her the manila envelope containing the divorce papers, signed, notarized, and officially delivered. "And just to part on a good note, here's a little gift for you." She didn't speak as she took the envelope, and I added, "If you don't mind, I've got things to do." The sex had been good, but the marriage had been a disaster. I shut the door behind me, leaning against it, the weight of everything finally lifting off my shoulders. It was over. Carol was no longer my problem. I had taken care of the last details with a hacker, ensuring the tape was sent out to her parents and all of the friends who had chosen her side over mine. I could have made it worse, sent it to her work, her parents' church, or gone public, but I didn't. Instead, I posted it to 2 adult sites, figuring the income from those sites would cover the hacker's fee. Carol, of course, threatened legal action, but nothing ever came of it. The tape had been routed through overseas sites, making it untraceable, and soon enough, the repercussions began. 3 weeks later, I received a short email from her parents. "We're sorry, we never knew." Some old friends tried to apologize, but I didn't bother to respond. The video spread quickly, and Carol's reputation was ruined. She quit her job, packed up, and moved away. In a matter of weeks, her co-workers saw the tape, but no one ever spoke about it. They saw me as the victim in the whole mess. 2 months later, Nick reached out. He'd seen the tape too, and admitted that had he been in my shoes, he might have done the same thing. But for the sake of peace in his family, he said, we couldn't hang out for a while. I understood. By that point, I'd lost both Pam and Nick, at least temporarily, and I decided to move forward. I started dating again. About 4 months later, I ran into Pam at a downtown club. She was with some friends, but eventually made her way over to me. "Hi, Steve," she said, her voice soft but hesitant. "How are you?" she asked. "Never better," I replied, a small smirk playing at my lips. "I heard what happened," she said, lowering her voice. "I saw part of the tape online. I didn't hesitate. You had no idea when you judged me." I cut her off. "You thought I was just some crazy guy trying to ruin his ex-wife's life. Well, you made your choice." She looked uncomfortable, but tried again. "Maybe we could talk sometime?" "Pam," I said, my tone blunt. "I really liked you, but it wasn't enough. You've got too much baggage for me now." I gestured toward a redhead who was approaching our table. "My date is coming back." "Take care, Pam," I said, my voice final. "I hope you find someone who meets your high standards." As the redhead reached me, I leaned in and kissed her. "Not introducing me?" she asked playfully. "Tammy, this is Pam," I said, keeping my voice steady. "We were in a relationship before." Pam's face tightened as I continued. "Pam, this is Tammy. He's with me now." "Good men are rare," Tammy said, her tone firm but kind. Pam gave a terse greeting, and before the conversation could go further, Tammy indicated we should leave. I hugged Pam and whispered in her ear, "I was really starting to care for you." It took me a long time to move on. I pulled away and gave her a quick kiss on the cheek, then turned toward the door with Tammy by my side. As we walked away, Pam's voice reached me, soft and regretful. "If only things had been different."